Guess we'll get started. I have a lot to share attachment wise, with the sharing of the screen. So I'm a little nervous about transitioning through that many different things. So if there's some kind of technical difficulties, I'll try to let you know. But as I was going through what we've done with Findagrave, I kept finding these different phases of the project and then problems that we encountered as we were going through the records. And I thought, oh boy. so
Interesting.
I guess I'll start with our actual page, if I can get to that. So this is the Sisters of Charity Cemetery. We actually didn't put this page together. There was a man, his name is Jim. I can't remember his last name at the moment, but his wife was on the faculty of our College of Mount St. Joseph. And he spent, who knows how many years putting together at least 1,000 of the almost 2,000 memorials that we have in our cemetery. So, yeah, so we're kind of in a unique situation. I'm assuming most communities would just be starting this from scratch. So I'm going to try to start what we ended up doing backwards, but at least for people who are potentially looking into doing a Findagrave page, more in order for that process. So the next thing I'll try to share here is so in your invitation email, I sent the blank template that Findagrave offers. And what you do is you'll save that. What we did with ours is we'd save it by the date that whoever was working on it. So for us, we actually used high school students to do this, but I would say, you really have to have a certain volunteer who's very detail oriented, especially when you're creating new records, because every date, every name, once it's in there, it takes a lot longer to go back into each individual record when it's created on Findagrave to edit. So just want to mention that before we get to the Excel spreadsheet here. So this one was completed in January of last year. I believe this was the end of the list, as you can see by Zanini. So she was able to complete adding all of the missing records to our cemetery collection, which was great because, now it's been over a year since we've done really anything with our Findagrave piece since we don't have our volunteers. And but so another thing, I'll see if I can, I don't think I can only share one thing at a time, right? Okay, well, we'll stick with this one and then I'll go to the other. So for this is the template that Findagrave provides. And sister is a prefix option that they have as, I guess, like you would call it, the controlled vocabulary. They did have SR for sister. And what we decided, and this is, I mean, and really depends on what you want to do, but we had legal or baptismal names first, and then in brackets, religious name. So it's all in one field. Some people put it in as the middle name. It could work that way, but you really have to be pretty consistent so that you can share, if anybody wants to actually search with it, how to use the system. And that's why we thought, at least with first name, even if they're using a religious name, it should come up, keyword being should. And then, last name, of course, is the same. They go in the European method of day, month, year when you're inputting the information, which was a bit of a challenge again for our high school student to really get used to writing that in that order.
So,
that can be a bit of a time. So you have birth and death, and then
okay.
Plot information, they don't really have a formula or template in place, and it really depends on everybody's cemetery is organized differently, but we just went with commas, with the largest being the sections. And then some are in rows or terraces. I think we ended up using the word row still because the terrace, people might not know what that means. And then the grave. And for our section A, it's actually circular. So you'll see some have the letter E after the grave. That's for the east side. And then W for the west, because apparently they ran the numbers concurrent for the sides. So more confusion. So I said we came up with all kinds of confusion there. We didn't do any inscription or gravesite details, which you could do, but again, for what we were going with our student, we kind of stuck to the bare minimum. So let's see real fast. I'll share the other Excel spreadsheet. So this was actually pulled from our member database, and that's what the student was using to build into that Findagrave template. So this was all the information that she need. And again, as you see, we of course had it in the not the European style. So that was about the hardest, you know, to really go in and make sure those weren't switched at all. But
Veronica,
yes,
can you add any columns for, or is this their set template? Because I'm thinking of our sisters in 1968 who changed their names. So we've got like we've got their legal name, we've got their religious name, but then we got the name that they changed from their previous name, because sometimes people are searching for somebody, have them by their old name, and we've got them by the new name. So we've got it both in our all three in our database.
let me see if I can go back to their template, because I just wanted to show you what we were using. That was from our database, but Findagrave, let me go back to they only have first, middle, and last name.
Okay.
So what we found is we had some sisters who actually changed their name to their legal name became their religious name in some cases. I don't know if we did a separate chart for that, but we did have a reception name separate printout or spreadsheet from our database, because I can't remember why. Well, kind of what you were getting into, I guess, it's because they were going off of whatever was in the Findagrave to make sure that their religious name was included if it wasn't already. So that got more into the editing than it would be for these new records. The new records it all came together, but if they were editing, sometimes the reception name was missing, especially for our later sisters. Where their grave marker, see, the person who volunteered, they were only going by the grave marker. So that was it. You're triggering my memory now. So in those cases, then we had to go back and add the reception name so that people could find that sister who they might not have known her by her baptismal name. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks.
I think that's in step 2 or 3. I'll one of the 80 million spreadsheets I'll be sharing. Oh, geez.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, your grave markers are showing the birth name or the religious name?
Some of our later sisters. Some of our later sisters went back to their baptismal name.
But that was also their religious name. What's on the gravestone is a religious name.
Yes.
Typically, but for some of the more recent sisters, sometimes they'll decide to go with their baptismal name.
Okay.
So
thanks.
Sorry for the confusion.
No, it's okay. I just want to make sure I was tracking there.
And so I'll show you what the record ends up looking like. And this is with nothing else added, because as I said, after that was one of the last things our students worked on before COVID hit. So no photos are added or anything. And that takes a lot of time too, because you can't do that with the Excel template. You have to wait until it's uploaded into the system and then go record by record. Adding the photos of both the grave marker and the actual sister too, if you want. And that's also, if you did want to add more information, some communities have added biographies. Some families have put memorials in place too. There's a larger description field that pops up under edits. So you can add to this quite a bit, but basically if you just did the template, this is what you'll see. This is what comes up. And then if you completed one a little bit more in detail. This was, again, one that was done by that Jim Kelly, I think his name is. So Jim had added the picture of the grave marker. And then one of the things our students did was to look and see who was missing photographs. So then they were able to go through and then add a picture. So Sister Basilia was also one of our Civil War nurses. So she has a special U.S. Army nurse marker.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. I can't blow it up much, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit about just doing the very basics to building the foundation of a Findagrave cemetery. And then let's see, we'll get to, that was step one. Then step two was when we were getting into the editing of records. So this is where I did have a special burial report created with reception name, which is a separate field in our database, because as I mentioned, some sisters went back to their baptismal name. So in the religious name field, sometimes the baptismal name is included, again, in the database, but then as you know, eventually too on the grave marker. So that's where they were running into this issue. Sharing, let's see, where's it at? Oh. So this is just a pretty basic list, but if I could scroll to the top, here we go. It's religious name, reception name.
Oh, okay.
And some are minor changes too. We had a few sisters that went through kind of like an evolution of their religious name. I keep thinking of Jane DeChantil, who is also one of our Civil War veterans, who ended up going to just Jane, I think, by the end. We don't know exactly when, but she's just Jane. Sister Jane. And there was another one. She was from New Mexico area, ended up adding like 3 names. It was, oh boy. But generally, that's what it's used for, this reception name list. So that was a project we had a student do. If these religious and reception name didn't match, that they go to the record and change that. So that was one big project. Let me just X out of a lot of these other ones we've already talked about real fast. A lot of times we don't have a lot of birth dates for our older sisters who entered in the mid-19th century. A lot of times our admission ledger would just include their age when they entered, so they kind of approximate a birth year. So we ended up adding to our Excel spreadsheet the date of birth, but a lot of it's just January 1st of a year. So I just wanted to preface by saying that when you see this, but this was the larger list that we first used really for us, because we started the project, oh gosh, almost 4 years ago with our DePaul Cristo Rey work study students. And they would actually go to the website Findagrave. So they'd have that up on one side of their screen, and then they'd have this spreadsheet up on the other side. And so then they look up the sister's name here. So we'll say Marie Elise Gerard. And then they'd go to the actual page and see, okay, she was one that wasn't in Findagrave at all. So that's, if there's an X in that first category, she wasn't listed. So she's one of the ones that was completed in that first step that I talked about when we built completely new records. Let's see, so we'll go up a couple and talk about one that actually did have a record. So Sister Blanche Gerard. So she didn't have any picture. She was missing either her baptismal or religious name, birth date or death date, and plot location apparently. So she was missing it all pretty much. And then, so we had one student, maybe one or two, who actually went through all of those Findagrave records, which for us, was well over 1,000 at that time, and made all those notations. And then we had another student come through and actually make the corrections using the spreadsheet and like the supplemental spreadsheets, like the reception name one, to make all the changes that were needed. So that was step 2. And then step 3 was, let's see if I can, I don't know how to, if I can, yeah. Didn't know if I could just share a folder. Apparently you can. So one of the things we did, another student project, was the one who was making the corrections to the record. If there was a grave marker photo missing, he would make a tally of all those, and then the next week that he'd be in, we'd go out to the cemetery and actually photograph the markers. So that's what the date is for the folder, was the date that we went out and took the pictures. So then for the following week, he could then make those changes and find a grave. So we did have some that were, even for the ones that Jim Kelly made, they were still missing the grave marker photos. And then I guess I have to stop sharing that. And then we have our, oh gosh, to go back. Our photo archivist, she went through all of our sisters' folders. Someone, I don't know exactly who, but someone went through all the folders of sisters and noted in our member database if they had a photograph or not. So that was really helpful for this project. So she put a chart together and instantly took those off the list based on our member database. But then for those who had a photo in their file, she pulled every single file and then scanned a photo. And her idea was to make them pretty low resolution and crop in as much as you could on the actual face of the sister. And at first I was kind of like, oh, I'd rather just have the whole picture, let's scan and do it nicely, I would say. But honestly, from family that have contacted us, they were so happy to be able to really clearly see the sister's face and, draw so many connections to other family members. So she was definitely right with that decision. So she put those together for our students alphabetically by last name. And so this was folder B. There's a folder C that also snuck in there, but generally she had one for each alphabet letter. And then that was another phase of our overarching Find a Grave project. So that was pretty much all the phases that we had. I've had something to share from Sister Mary Ancilla, who wasn't able to join us today. She had another scheduling conflict, but she wanted to share about her community cemetery, which is much different in sort of the use and kind of overall design of the project. So you see if this is loading. It didn't load, so hold on. I think I have to X out of all my other ones. Okay. Well, it's still, for some reason the pictures aren't loading. Okay, well, all right. So she had a little thing I'll try to read here. I don't know if you're seeing the PDF too. I'll try to move that to the side if you are. So they've created a virtual cemetery on the Find a Grave website, since our sisters are buried in the parish cemetery across the street from here. My main purpose was to make the graves, along with the photo and the text from the obituary, accessible to all of our sisters who are in the daughter houses, especially as we anticipate preparing for our 100th Jubilee of the first sisters arriving in this country from Germany. And I should say too, this is the Sisters of St. Francis of the Martyr St. George, and they're based in Alton, Illinois. Let's see, so that way the sisters who are planning and asking for information, she could quickly send links to the Findagrave records. And so the sisters' responses to it have all been favorable, expressing gratitude, how beautiful, and so on. No information is private. It is a public cemetery, but the obits were published in the local newspaper, so that's why she felt comfortable with sharing those. Many of our deceased sisters we have never met and have not even known what they look like and what they did. So it was exciting for them to actually be able to feel like they had some connection with that sister by reading her story. And she did discover, kind of similar to our journey, that some sisters already had a page that had been created by a family member or someone who knew her. So let's see if I have been blocking with the PDF. This is her page. We'll click on one here. Oh, sorry. Cat knocked my tablet over. All right. So we have Sister Giselberta Bavindiek. There's her grave marker. And then this is that description field I was talking about that you can add to once you have created the record. And that's where she has the obituary. So I'd be happy to send that link along too if anyone else would be interested in kind of perusing her community's cemetery, because it's a lot more information than we were able to share, but yeah, and a neat sort of purpose behind it too. And that's pretty much everything I had to share. It seemed overwhelming when I was opening all of this. I thought, oh gosh, it's going to be too much, but I didn't want to make it seem too complex. But as you get into it, it really kind of, you just build into steps where you're only focusing on one aspect at a time. And I would definitely recommend doing that rather than trying to kind of do all this at the beginning and then get into it. So yeah, well, does anybody, oh, Karatasa, you're muted there.
Am I?
Yeah.
How does one set up an account like you were talking about before that allows you to do the templates for your sisters? Do you have to set up an account of some that was mentioned?
Yes, you have to make one through the Findagrave website, which is still free. So when we actually started this project in 2016 or 2017, it was its own entity. Findagrave was its own website, but I believe just about a year after we started, it was purchased by Ancestry. So, but at least as of, I would say now, I just looked it up and it's still free to log in and to use. The only issue too I wanted to mention is if you are going to be doing a very lengthy project like we did with the editing of records that are already existing, put in an ad blocker for your browser, because I've never seen that many ads on a page. It would actually take a student, when we first started, 2 to 3 minutes just to load a record, because that much was, being downloaded at a time. So we really had to, that was another thing we had to look into. I thought we can't, that's going to take way too long. A lot of downtime there. So that's one issue with it being free, and now with it being hosted through Ancestry, the ad situation. But beyond that, it's free to use. They have a lot of resources like that Excel template to make it as simple as you could expect with a web-based database like this is. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can see too, I was actually able to make the account in the name of our student, so when the image is uploaded, it actually gives her their name. So
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it identifies who's doing it.
Mhm.
Veronica,
So-
this is Loretta. I have a few questions.
Sure.
Let me put my hand in first. Looking at your spreadsheet, when you had the column for the grave location, I noticed there weren't spaces between the section, the grave number. Is that what they require, or was that just something that you did?
Now, that's just how ours was set up in our database. You know, it's just all one line.
Okay.
We have a burial tab, and then you know, a place for the cemetery, and then just
Separate.
the grave information. So,
Okay, so you just copied it from your database.
and the only thing we
Okay.
had it actually was the commas, because I thought maybe going forward it would be nice that it's not this big long list of row, you know, in one big
Right.
little mess.
Right.
Um,
Okay. And then how long did that project take to this point?
Well, we started, I believe, the 2016-2017 school year with, it was our first student that I was involved with DePaul Christa Ray, and they only come in 1 day a week. And this was one of usually 2 or 3 projects that they were working on for us. But, you know, through 2020, we were still working on this project.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of detailed work.
And especially for our size cemeteries, you can see we have almost 2,000 sisters
Mhm.
represented in our cemetery. And some of those, they might not actually be buried there, but we have a monument that they call Fields Afar. And some people
Mhm.
have added
Mhm.
entries, and they actually even photograph just the name of the sister on that monument.
Mm.
So some are not technically buried there, but we decided to keep those in because they are represented by that monument. So,
Okay, and then for the St. Francis sisters, so I didn't quite understand. They're buried in a public cemetery, but the community created a virtual page for them
they created
so
what
that
they call a virtual
they
cemetery.
were all together instead of having to find them, spread them or wherever they were in the public cemetery. This way they kind of had their own cemetery. They were their own grouping.
That's what it seemed like from the top of the page. It listed the sisters, the community name. And if it would have been the county cemetery, it would have said, you know, Alton County, such and such cemetery. So it looks like they built a whole new cemetery within the Findagrave system. And I guess
what's interesting about that, if you can do that, then if you have sisters buried in different states, and maybe they did this, is that you could bring them all together into one and have one community virtual cemetery, even though they're buried in 5 different states.
Yeah, I would
Okay,
think
thank
it's
you.
possible, especially when you're building with that template, because you could add, I think, also the cemetery location, I think was one of the fields that you could add.
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
Yeah,
Okay,
'cause
thank you.
we also have sisters buried in several other states in the same way. We have a monument, yes, but they are buried in other states besides Wisconsin.
And countries.
Yeah.
We have some in China even. I think a couple in
Mhm.
Italy too. So that would be nice for them. I was just thinking that would be a good way. Maybe we could, I'm going to write that down actually, because I was trying to think of how we could honor those sisters, especially in China. We've
That's a nice, yeah.
that mission quite a bit lately.
Good thing to do. Thank you, Veronica.
Our advantage here was that our historical society in Manitowoc County decided that because of the Find a Grave initiative for genealogy researchers, they decided that they were going to go around and take photos of every grave site in the county. We have 89 cemeteries, and they had volunteers who went around and took pictures of every single grave site. So we didn't even know that they were coming out here and taking those pictures. And they, they ended up, we got a booklet with all the names in it and everything. But that was one way that we got on Find a Grave, because everyone, and it was a real project for our county to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we got into it. So there was a lot of work already done beforehand with the taking of the pictures and adding the names and the dates already.
Mm-hmm. That was a major undertaking. Never heard of it on the county level.
Right, they did it on the
Been some
county
Boy
level.
Scout projects. I've seen
Mhm.
these Boy Scouts take on cemeteries.
Big project.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky, I'm blessed because I don't have any students that I utilize, but there's a lady in the county that Carolyn Johnson, as soon as one of our sisters dies, she's got it posted by the next day. She'll have their obituary on there. She'll have everything already up. I don't have to worry about posting anything. She'll do all that.
That's nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's another piece to our project. It really just went to 2016 because that's when we initially downloaded that spreadsheet from our member database. So we really need to update it through to the
Oh, yeah.
present.
Yeah, there's a lot that we need to look at, especially with our older sisters. I haven't ever checked those out.
I have a question about the relationship of your own virtual cemetery to the total Ancestry Findagrave system. I'm assuming that total Ancestry Findagrave still stands on its own, and then your cemetery, your virtual cemetery, is a single entity that anybody that whoever wants to can go into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm just trying to get the relationship between two systems.
It's completely public, and if you did create one in the community's name, that's how I always search for ours. I say Sisters of Charity Cemetery, Cincinnati, Findagrave, and that's what it'll come up with, that base page where you can put the sisters' names or search for specific records. I believe it also, with the Ancestry connection, feeds into their larger search portal or database. Because I have had people say, we found the census and the Findagrave for our great aunt. So it sounds like that as a part of this migration into Ancestry, that it's expanded the use of the website quite a bit. All public though, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about how to kind of assuage sisters' fears about Findagrave. We've had some negative reactions to our sisters' information being on Findagrave because it was done way before I became archivist. Just someone went out and did it. I mean, it's a public cemetery, so I'm just not sure if there's something that you think would be a good thing to say to explain it, like this is actually probably going to be a good thing in the long run and that type of thing. I'm just not sure how to kind of frame it in a more positive way because they've had a lot of negative feelings about it.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was thinking of, I believe it was when Virginia raised this on the listserv. There were a lot of members that were worried about, having the records be public, maybe inviting vandals or, just people to be more aware of the graves and their location, the concerns with security and that. And I don't really, I can't say much to assuage that. For us, our cemetery is on the grounds and it's monitored by security 24 hours a day. They have one of those cars that come every 15 minutes or so. But I would say, that's why I was really inspired by Sister Mary Ann Silla's use of Findagrave in such a positive way to share the stories of the sisters, especially with this major milestone coming up for their community, that it was kind of an extension of the celebration of the community. And I didn't really think of Findagrave in that way, but I'll be happy to share her email with you. I made it a PDF so you can share it with the group.
I think one thing when people are concerned about, how much information is shared, it's sort of like, I think for the sisters nowadays, whatever is put into an obituary, which goes into a public newspaper, that's about what gets shared on Findagrave.
Right. Okay.
And they only publish deceased members. If you've got 5 siblings, if the sister has a few siblings that are living, they don't get put on Findagrave. You know, so there's no way people could contact them or harass them or whatever. It's only deceased people that really are on there.
And then for us, we didn't even get to putting obituary information up. Some families have, but you know, it's just the bare minimum of here's the grave marker, here's the sister's information, here's a picture if we have it, you know. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say too, that it's weighed there was a sister who was a bit concerned within our archives of this project, but now that our campus has been closed for the past year, and it's probably, I wish we were in Caritas's situation. It sounds like we might be another year. I mean, that's what they're talking about on our end. I don't know, but we've had so many genealogy requests. I mean, that of course has not stopped. It's probably increased since everyone's been at home. And that if we wouldn't have had the Findagrave, they wouldn't be able to see that grave marker or, you know, easily access a photograph of the sister. So it's really been beneficial for us this past year.
Right.
Even incomplete, you know, we still haven't gotten to those new records yet to add pictures and grave markers, but it's still a lot.
Yeah.
Positive part of that too is that if you don't do Findagrave, if you don't take control over it, someone else will. And I have found records of the sisters that are incorrect in the information that's put up there. And I had a gentleman approach me about 4 years ago, which got this whole conversation started. And he wanted to take over and do this for us, but that would have meant providing him with information that we weren't comfortable doing. And so there was a lot of negative reaction. I said, well, we'll wait on it. But I'm seeing that more and more information is being put up and people are putting it up incorrectly. So I'm going to go back to suggest that, you know, maybe this is a project that we should do. We have another problem too. We have a couple of cemeteries, and one of them is a sister's plot in a larger public Catholic cemetery. And we have some missing graves, number one. It's on a hill, and I think every time there's a rainstorm, the silt comes down and buries the markers. But beyond that, the cemetery office has lost the information about the specific burials. And on top of that, the markers were changed in the 60s. We had stand-up marble markers, headstones that fell over. So they put flat markers, and they did it in a rush, and no one checked the company that was doing it. So we have misinformation, we have names that are spelled incorrectly, and you can imagine what they did with religious names, dates that are wrong. And before I do anything with Findagrave, I really have to, you know, make sure that that's all corrected. So that's another issue I have to deal with. And Veronica, can I just jump in?
Oh, sure.
A Frances de Chantal, who was a Civil War nurse, and she dropped the Francis.
Oh, she just went to de Chantal. Oh,
yeah. So you had a Jane.
that's interesting.
she's got the double marker, but the army marker is at her feet, so they're not pushed together. One's at the head and one's at the feet.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a side note, but all those came through the work of Ellen Ryan Jolly. If you've seen that book, Nuns of the Battlefield, that's what she did all that research, you know, for each community. And then she submitted the list that's at the end of each chapter to Congress. Yeah. And they actually appropriated those to be manufactured for the system.
Actually, I didn't have the date when that headstone was placed there. So that's interesting.
Well, yeah, it was 1918 that she submitted the list to Congress, but I think they came sometime in the early 20s.
Oh, okay.
Because it was before the Nuns of the Battlefield Monument. I think that went up in 1925.
The one in Washington?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Because that was also, the book was published in 1927, and she features a photograph.
Yeah, I should check that. Thank you.
What was interesting with that battlefield monument is if there were sisters still living, which we had one with the Franciscan Sisters of the Poor, Sister Antonia Gobe, they brought a sprig of green. So the myrtle that, like the ivy around the base of the Nuns of the Battlefield Monument, part of that came from St. Clair Convent in
Oh,
Cincinnati.
nice.
So,
That's good to
Yeah.
know.
Well, Veronica and Virginia, with the question, Virginia, your comment about the man who wanted to put the data in and you prefer to do it yourself. So if you, who can edit a page? So Veronica, when you created yours, do you have sole ownership or can anyone edit it?
so that is a challenge. I was meaning to, and I got on the jolly kick there. But so for the records that we started with that were already in the cemetery, those are owned by Jim Kelly, the person who put them together originally. All the new records that we created with the Excel template, we are the owners of that. So if I want to make an edit, I can edit it right away. But if you saw on the Sister Basilia Applegate page, it says suggest edits. So we have to go in and give suggestions. And if whoever is the person overseeing that page, if they're not willing to look into or update, if they are persona non grata, then the changes aren't going to be made. So that's a concern. Like Virginia said, if it's, random folks that you don't really have any connection with, will they make those changes? Well, even if you suggest the edits. Thankfully, Jim Kelly, he's been very responsive for us. We emailed him the first year we started the project to say, hey, here, we were with the archives. You're going to see a student. She's younger, but, she actually sent him an email that was part of her project to describe it. And so they had a nice rapport back and forth. And since that time, he's been very responsive. So if we've had an edit, he usually changes it in a day. So. And that's
so
all
I guess that's where a virtual cemetery would have value, because if you own that and you put the data in, it's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully someone would see that, and that's the only way you could override someone else's work then.
By creating
if they are not going to correct it, you can offer the correction, and if they don't correct it, that's the only way you could correct someone's work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's starting that community cemetery. Yeah.
Ladies, you can ask that person to transfer all of those memorials to you for your ownership.
Oh,
They can transfer everything to you, and then you would have full ownership. We've been using Findagrave since 2010 for the Sisters of IHM in Scranton. And I have asked people that have put up their own memorials to transfer them to ours. And if we put ours up first and they did a duplicate, you can go through Findagrave and have the duplicate removed, as long as you're the first person to put it up.
yes.
So I did this project. It took me 1 year to get all of our sisters from the beginning of the community to 2010 in Findagrave. And as a sister dies, I go in and add them every single time. So we're current up till the sister who died on Tuesday.
And you do it right away.
I do it right away. As soon as the sister dies, I put in just their name to hold the place so no one else can put it in. And then I put in her obituary after.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, I was thinking, because it takes a while for us to assign the grave information. It's usually a week or two.
Yeah, just go in and put
if you just do the name, that's
just put their name in. It'll hold the place.
So that means then that, I'm sorry, so that means that if someone's already put in incorrect information about a sister, you can't correct it easily.
No, if someone else owns that memorial, you would have to write to them and ask them to fix it.
Yeah, someone had pointed that out to me, but I had forgotten that.
And all edits come to that person. You can accept them or decline them based on what you want to do. We list our sister's name as what it is when they die. So if they have their religious name, M. St. Anthony is their name. And then if they don't, and their name is just Sister Beth, Sister Beth Doe IHM, formerly known as Sister M. Francine, of the Sister Servants of Immaculate Heart of Mary, died on whatever day.
And that's in the description field? You put
we write all of our sisters' obituaries, which get published in the paper. So the obituary goes in as the biography. And since that's all public, you can search and find the obituary online through like legacy.com. That goes on Findagrave. We also put where the sister is buried in the plot section.
One
Yeah.
thing that
And their photo.
one thing that I found with editing, when I got on Findagrave, gosh, that's been over 20 years ago. I don't think there was a place that said suggest edit. There wasn't any way you could edit or do anything with it. But I've noticed now in the last few years, now they have the place where it suggest edit. So if I find something wrong and I do a suggestion, it goes to that person who did it. And I've gotten responses right away from people. Most people have email. And so I've gotten good responses from them if they can do it, if they can't. And they appreciate it when there's a correction for a name or whatever. I think it's over time, it's getting more user friendly because of the number of people using it more because of genealogy work.
Yeah. Yeah, it generates an email when you do that suggest edits to the person. And that way, usually if they know you, like now that we've described Jim, you know, who we are, that what we're editing is correct. He usually just approves it pretty blindly. And then I get an email to say, your suggested edit has been approved, something to that effect. So the only thing is if you're doing a project like ours, you're going to get like 300 of those emails like approved, you know. But I will talk to him though. I'm glad to know if we could transfer the whole cemetery to our ownership, because I think he'd be more than willing to do that at this point. And that would just be much easier going forward. So I'll have to talk to him if there's kind of a overarching way that he could just do it by the cemetery, because he might have volunteered and done other local cemeteries. I'm not really sure. So that's really helpful. But I will say on the flip side too, just one slight, not really a terrible example, but we have the sister, Mary Sipnin. I can't remember her last name. She is not a sister of charity. She's not buried in our cemetery. Somebody created a record. I've sent numerous suggestions to say, this person is not here. You know, I'm sorry. I don't know what community she's from. You know, I've really tried to look into that. I don't know, but she's definitely not one of ours. And they won't remove her page, you know, her record from our cemetery. So I just about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had a photo request for that same sister. And it's like, oh, no, she's not one of ours. But people assume, you know, once they look at that cemetery that she's in our community. So that is one where the ownership issue really has come up recently. So, yeah. Well, it seems like I think we've talked through Findagrave quite a bit. I think we've hit all the issues. Thank you so much, especially Sister Beth and your companion there for sharing, especially about how you're continuing to update the community cemetery going forward as a sister dies. I was waiting to do kind of a whole process, you know, by year, but as you said, it's better to do it as soon as possible so you reserve that record. So,
Maria is on the ball. She keeps us moving ahead and with the details too.
So we'll have to make that a part of our process when a sister dies. I wrote that down for Sister Pat.
I think the other thing people often don't think about is, you know, it's a form of preservation. So, you know, if you listen to Virginia's story about these graves sinking and sliding and disappearing, Findagrave is a record for graves aren't permanent. We feel like they're the permanent record, but they often they don't last because they weren't placed correctly or because of weather or because of all kinds of things. So, you know, the sooner you capture those gravestones, you also have now a permanent record. So if it sinks into the ground or gets washed away in a mudslide or whatever, you have a, you know, you have a preserved piece of that history, which I think is really important. And you don't really think about it until you go to a grave and it's not there. you know, or it's so they sink, and that's a real problem. The grass grows over and you can't find it, or the records are destroyed and there's no plot information. I mean, all of those things that you're capturing in these entries create another kind of permanent record, which can potentially outlive the physical record.
No, it's a very good point.
I just throw one thing in too. A couple of years ago, I was in France, and I was determined to visit our second foundress's grave. And I went online and I found it on Findagrave. And it was in the middle of a terrible heat wave, but I was really determined to go. And luckily, I happened to email another CSJ archivist. And she said, by the way, she said, that's not where Mother St. John Fontbonne is buried. There's a mistake on Findagrave. She was in a completely different cemetery on the other side of the city of Lyon. And I would have killed myself because it was almost 100 degrees that day. And there's the mistake is still there. I think I sent a notice into Findagrave and said, you know, you've got to correct your records, but it's there. And I wonder how many other, you know, people have just assumed this is where this very notable sister is buried. So, you know, the mistakes are out there, and that's a good way for me to convince leadership that we should really take charge and do something. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's best to be an authority on this. You know, there's still going to be the issues of security and privacy to walk through with sisters and your leadership, but at the end of the day, that you have control and that the information is correct that you're sharing. That's what's the most important. Yeah, that's why I think what you're saying about the most recent graves, I haven't even looked about what grave information is included for those who passed since 2016. I kind of shudder to think right now. Oh boy. But so we'll definitely be adding that to our process going forward. We'll make that a point. So thank you so much. I'm really glad. That's really something meaningful that's coming out of this for me.
it was really good to hear from everybody about this. Thank you.
One thing, just to share more about a gravestone rather than find a grave. But in doing genealogy work, the place that I first started with the Strodeff relationship was out of St. John Lutheran, because they had a huge gravestone out there with the name Strodeff on it. But nobody had any idea who was buried there. They didn't have any records of who was buried at that site. They just knew the name was there. Well, in doing genealogy work, over time, I came across the will of a Strodeff who had died, and her children bought a gravesite at that place, and that was who was buried there. So it was in discovering, just through a will and other happenstance, who was really buried at that site. So it was just a whole different way of doing genealogy and find a grave.
And you'll learn so much about your cemetery. You think like, oh, well, we know it, you know, we lived it kind of thing. But no, it's kind of like you said too, Virginia, about cemetery markers being replaced. Our entire section A, the oldest section of the cemetery, was replaced. And no one remembers when. And it was in the last 20 years. I'm like, come on, guys. And they're like, well, it was sometime, like, I think we narrowed it down to 1990 and 2006. I'm like, there's got to be a way to narrow this down even more. But it all came about. Record. Yeah, well, that was it. They didn't have any receipts for it, and I thought, this had to be a capital expense. This had to have been saved. I mean, we're talking hundreds of markers that were purchased at one time. But what happened was somebody contacted us from a county up north, and they had one of our grave markers. And so we went out to the cemetery in a panic, thinking again with the vandalism, oh no, you know, somebody got out there, but no, it was the original marker, which was removed. We don't know when. And sister has her current marker is fine, but we now have her original marker too. And so we used to have, when we had display space, we had that up with a, what was it? Some kind of caper, I think I called it. I can't remember the name of it, but a curious caper maybe, but a little story about who the sister was and how we kind of uncovered this interesting quirk to the cemetery's history. But yeah, you'll find out all sorts of kooky things. Oh. Well, all righty. Well, if anybody doesn't have any other questions, I think this is a good time to wrap up. We're hitting about 4 o'clock. So
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you all. Thank you all for